When I was 22, I made the decision to take my very first solo trip abroad. After doing a lot of research, I finally chose Bali, Indonesia. The peaceful environment, the relatively low cost, and the sheer beauty of nature made it seem like the ideal spot for a solo traveler. The first 4 days were absolutely wonderful. I spent my mornings on the beach, my afternoons exploring ancient temples, and my evenings sampling local food at the night markets. Everything felt so perfectly normal that I decided I wanted to spend the final few days of my trip somewhere completely secluded. That was why I booked a small wooden cottage surrounded by dense jungle on the outskirts of Ubud. When I arrived at the resort, I noticed there were only 6 cottages in the entire place. Each one was set quite far apart from the others. The property was surrounded by tall betel nut trees, palms, and thick bamboo groves, with a narrow mountain stream flowing right in front. While the place looked breathtakingly beautiful during the day, the entire environment became unnaturally silent once evening fell. The next afternoon, I rented a bicycle to explore the neighboring villages. The sun was already dipping low in the west. I decided to stop at a tiny local cafe located a bit off the main road to have a cup of coffee. That was the first time I saw him. The man was sitting alone in a far corner of the cafe. He looked middle-aged, wore a wide-brimmed hat, and had on a dusty khaki jacket. There was a steaming cup of coffee sitting in front of him, but his eyes were fixed entirely on me, almost the whole time. The moment our eyes met, he quickly looked away. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence, but a few minutes later, I looked back over, and he was staring at me in the exact same way. The situation felt incredibly uncomfortable, but I decided to ignore it. I finished my coffee and started riding back toward my cottage. The narrow mountain road was almost entirely deserted. After traveling a little distance, I heard the distinct sound of an old motorcycle engine behind me. I turned my head to look, and my heart skipped a beat. It was the exact same man. He was riding very slowly, trailing right behind me. When I increased my speed on the bicycle, he speeded up his motorcycle too. Panic started to set in. I pulled over to the side of the road and pretended to fix my bicycle chain, hoping he would just pass by. The man rode past me, but stopped his motorcycle about 100 yards ahead. Then he turned off the engine and just stood there. He wasn't going anywhere. He was waiting for me. I didn't have the courage to ride past him. I turned my bicycle around and headed toward a market in a different village. I sat on a bench outside a small grocery store there for about 40 minutes. Once the crowds began to grow, I asked some locals for directions and took an alternate route back to my cottage. When I got back to the resort, I reported the incident to the manager. He looked surprised at first and asked if I had managed to take a photograph of the man. When I told him no, he said, "We haven't received any complaints like this before, but if it makes you feel uncomfortable, I can move you to the cottage right next to the reception area tonight." I started to think that maybe I was just being overly paranoid, so I declined his offer to switch rooms. The next morning, I was sitting by the mountain stream, quietly reading a book. Suddenly, I got the distinct feeling that someone was watching me. I lifted my eyes and looked across the stream into the thick bamboo grove, and my entire body went cold. The same khaki jacket, the same wide-brimmed hat. The man was standing right behind the trees, partially hidden. He didn't have a phone in his hands, nor did he have a camera. He was simply standing there, staring at me with a completely blank, unblinking expression. The moment I stood up, he slowly backed away and vanished into the depths of the bamboo grove. That afternoon, the manager took a staff member to search the surrounding woods, but they couldn't find anyone. To help me stay alert, the manager wrote down some emergency numbers for me. He warned me that the mobile network sometimes gets weak in the mountainous areas, so if any problem arose, I should use the emergency alarm bell installed right next to the porch. That night, sleep was incredibly hard to come by. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I woke up with a sudden jolt. I thought I heard someone walking very softly on the wooden floorboards of the porch. Then the sound stopped right outside my front door. I held my breath, listening intently in the darkness. Then, very slowly, the doorknob began to rattle. And then again. Someone was standing right outside, testing the lock on my door. Trembling, I picked up my phone. There was no network. I tried dialing the emergency numbers anyway, but the call wouldn't connect. After a few tense seconds, the noises at the door stopped completely. It felt like the person had finally walked away. Right at that moment, I heard a soft, rustling sound directly underneath my window, summoning every bit of courage I had left. I crept over and moved the corner of the curtain back by just an inch. In the pale moonlight, I saw him clearly. The man was crouching right under the window. His face was turned upward, looking straight at the glass. It was as if he had been waiting the entire time for me to move that curtain. Our eyes locked through the glass, and he slowly stood up to his full height. He didn't say a single word. He didn't smile. He just stared at me with that same cold, fixed gaze for a few terrifying seconds. Then he turned and melted back into the pitch-black darkness of the jungle. I spent the rest of the night locked inside the bathroom, refusing to come out. The moment dawn broke, I decided to check out of the cottage. When the resort owner arrived, I explained every single detail of what had happened. He immediately pulled up the CCTV footage from the previous night. On the video screen, it was clear as day. At exactly 2:42 a.m., a man stepped onto my porch, walked up to the door, and tested the doorknob. After that, he went over and crouched beneath the window for nearly 3 full minutes. Because most of his face was shadowed beneath the wide-brimmed hat, it was impossible to identify his features clearly. The owner then revealed that 2 weeks ago, another small resort nearby had reported a similar incident. The guest there had also been a solo foreign female tourist. They had handed the footage over to the local police, but no one knew who the man was. I didn't stay there for another single second. I moved into a large, secure hotel inside the main city and spent the remaining 2 days of my trip there. I truly thought it was all over. But on the day I was scheduled to return home, while riding in a taxi to the airport, the vehicle stopped at a busy traffic light. Without thinking, I casually glanced out the side window. There, standing right across the street under a lamppost, was a figure. The khaki jacket, the wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't smiling at all. He just stared directly at me with that same blank expression, and very slowly, he raised his right hand. It felt as though he knew with absolute certainty that I had recognized him. The traffic light turned green, and the taxi accelerated forward. I looked back through the rear window, and the man was still standing in the exact same spot. A few seconds later, he completely disappeared into the crowded sidewalk. To this day, I still don't know what his intentions were. Did he truly want to cause me physical harm? Or was his twisted sense of pleasure derived entirely from silently feeding on human terror? The answer remains completely unknown. However, even now, whenever I find myself in a quiet place at midnight and hear the faint creak of footsteps on a wooden floor, that cursed night in Bali flashes vividly before my eyes, along with the silent face of that man standing just outside the window. I'm Alex Vane, and you've been listening to Unquiet Corners. If this story found its way into your thoughts, consider subscribing for more journeys into the dark. What would you have done if those same eyes kept finding you, no matter how far you ran?